Cadillac was always an innovative brand all the way back to the brand's inception. And Cadillac was the first in 1912 to introduce the self-starter on its vehicles that was engineered by Charles Kettering. And Cadillac was also the first to introduce a mass-produced overhead valve V8 engine in 1949, simultaneously with Oldsmobile. But beyond these relatively well-known inventions, did you know that Cadillac in the 1960s introduced a number of top automotive technologies, many of which we still enjoy today? I don't think that many people realize how old some of these technologies really are that many modern vehicles have. But what we're going to discuss in this video is a number of inventions that Cadillac came out with in the 1960s that you still see today on many vehicles. And they amazingly were introduced by Cadillac 60-ish or more years ago. So let's talk about the first of these inventions, and that is the cornering lamp that was introduced in Cadillacs in 1962. Now, cornering lamps are in many different vehicles today, and they were optional on many vehicles, particularly in the 1970s and 1980s. They kind of went out of style in the 1990s for a little bit. They came back, particularly on foreign cars, in the 2000s and have been relatively popular since then on upper-end vehicles. But Cadillac was actually the first to introduce cornering lamps in 1962, and they really integrated it quite well into their design. You'll notice that the corner lamp is kind of hiding in this area in front of the front wheel on the 1962 Cadillac design. And as you can see, it's kind of sandwiched in between that body side crease and the bumper and the headlamp area. And it's kind of beautifully integrated as well in there. But this was the first time that cornering lamps were offered on Cadillacs and any car for that matter. And I have to say that in addition to being beautifully integrated, they were quite functional as well. When you put the turn signal on, when you had the parking lamps or the headlamps on, this cornering lamp would illuminate and help a driver see what was, of course, around the corner. This was something that would continue on Cadillacs for a number of years to come, and other vehicles would soon follow suit, particularly in the luxury segment. But it was first introduced in Cadillacs in 1962. Let's go on to the next invention that Cadillac introduced, and that was in 1964. Cadillac introduced the automatic climate control system. Now, automatic climate control, you say, that was introduced in 1964? Yes, it was, and it was introduced by Cadillac in that particular model year. Now, how in the world did they execute automatic climate control in an era where there were no computers? Well, the climate control system that Cadillac introduced for 1964 was, of course, not digital and didn't have any computer-controlled elements. It was purely analog. And it was a very, very simple design. There were effectively three different resistors that were placed in series to basically sum their inputs, and that was the determinant of what the outlet air temperature would be as well as the fan speed. There was a sensor in the interior of the car, there was a sensor on the outside of the car, and then there was a sensor for the duct temperature. And the lattermost sensor was there just to account for variations that come with engine speed, like when you slow down to a stoplight, the air conditioning, the outlet temperature is not as cold as when you're driving. And effectively, the summation of those three resistances through thermistors or thermal resistors was what determined, as I mentioned, the outlet temperature as well as the fan speed. Now, the other interesting thing that really made automatic climate control possible on Cadillacs for 1964 was this idea of integrating the heat and the air conditioning systems. Prior to this point, the heating systems and the air conditioning systems were really separate when they were in vehicles. They weren't integrated together. So the heat would come out of the heater outlets, the air conditioning would come out of separate outlets. You may recall some vehicles in the early 1950s, for example, the air conditioner was in the trunk and there were those plastic tubes that would feed the cold air up to the ceiling where it would come out. Clearly, that's a completely separate setup from the heater core that was under the dash or in that cowl area under hood. But for 1964, what Cadillac introduced was a very innovative system that blended the heater and the air conditioning systems together. And what this allowed was something that prior systems did not enable, and that was that you could change the outlet temperature by varying the blend of the air that was going across the evaporator as part of the air conditioning system, as well as the heater core. So you could basically have super cold air coming off of the air conditioner, and then you could warm it up by blowing that over the heater core. And this was accomplished through the use of really what was called a blend door or an air mix door to enable the system to basically determine how much air was going to pass over the heater core and get reheated after it had been cooled by the evaporator from the air conditioning system. Again, this was a highly innovative feature for the time to integrate both of these setups together. Remember, for years, cars had separate setups, and if you didn't have air conditioning in cars, you didn't have the outlets in the dash. You just had kind of the kick well vents, and you had the heater. And air conditioning was often added separately as a dealer accessory in many early years of air conditioning. But here, this really enabled Cadillac to introduce automatic climate control. And you had a little thumb wheel that you could select the desired temperature. And then there were two automatic settings, really a low speed and a high speed for the fan. And it wasn't that there were only two fan speeds. I believe there were a series of 4 fan speeds, maybe 5 fan speeds. It was just that if you put the automatic setting on the lower fan, it would have a lower outlet, let's say lower level of outlet air in terms of the overall speed of the air in the left setting versus the right setting, which was the high setting. You just have a higher volume of air. And it was overall a pretty amazing, let's say, system. Think about it. This is 1964, and you basically can just set a temperature and forget it. The car will take care of the rest. It'll control what the outlet temperature is. It will control where the air is coming out, whether it's on the lower section of the car or on the upper vents. And really, you can just forget about it. Something that had never been done before and amazingly innovative. This was done in 1964. It would take Lincoln a few more years to introduce their own automatic climate control system. So think of that. It was years before Lincoln would introduce theirs, I believe, in 1966. And it was so innovative that Cadillac was given a 1-year exclusive across their lineup to introduce automatic climate control. 1965 would be the year that other GM divisions could introduce automatic climate control. And for example, 65 Bonneville has Pontiac's variant of automatic climate control. So an amazingly simple system, completely analog and highly innovative, all done by Cadillac in 1964. Let's go on to 1966, in which there were 2 amazing introductions of technology that were pioneered by Cadillac. The first is electric seating. Yes, those seat heaters that you love in your cars today were actually invented and first put in cars by Cadillac in 1966. Now, amazingly, the engineer for the system in Cadillacs had engineered this by 1951, 52, I believe, was granted the patent in 1955. But it would take General Motors over a decade to really introduce this technology to the public. And the strangest thing about it was that it really didn't advertise it. In fact, in the 1966 Cadillac brochure, the fact that you could order a seat heater is buried on page 12 of a 16-page brochure in a small, very fine area of text. It's not called out anywhere else. It's not called out on the option sheet. It's just amazingly kind of forgotten about, despite the fact that Cadillac introduced it in 1966. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why this option would not last very long. It would last from 1966 through 1968 on Cadillacs before it would be dropped. And I think that was just because people and dealers didn't know about it. Who wouldn't order something like this in the cold weather climates? The system was set up so that it could automatically turn on if the temperature outside, or the temperature in the vehicle, I should say, was below 50 degrees when you turn the key on. Or it could be manually turned on or turned off. And you could get it on leather seats, cloth seats, bucket seats, bench seats. You could get it across really the entire Cadillac lineup. The interesting thing was that the electric seats were, of course, the front seats on all the Cadillacs except the Fleetwood 75 limousines, where it was optional for the rear seats because, well, why does the chauffeur need electric seats? It's the passengers in the luxury compartment in the back that really need that. But yes, 1966 was the year for the first time that heated seats were introduced into cars, and that was all Cadillac. It would take so many more years after Cadillac would drop the option in 1968 for heated seats to really come back into the marketplace. And, oh well, they did eventually. Now, another interesting invention that Cadillac introduced in 1966 was its exclusive variable ratio power steering. Now, up to this point, power steering ratios were just fixed. In other words, nothing changed as you turned the wheel. It had the same ratio, and it would turn the wheels at the same pace. But for 1966, Cadillac introduced something different, and that was its exclusive variable ratio power steering. And the purpose was to really make the steering less twitchy, let's say, on center, but to become increasingly fast as you turn the wheel more and more and more. And this helped with parking and maneuvering at low speeds, and was something that eventually would proliferate across the entire General Motors lineup. And it was something that other automakers didn't have. If you drive a Ford vehicle, for example, of the late 1960s, compared to a General Motors vehicle late 1960s, you'll notice how much nicer the GM steering is. It has a little bit of weight to it, and you don't have to keep turning the wheel more and more. You have more turns lock to lock in the Ford versus the GM for the reason that I'm mentioning. The GM, in terms of turns lock to lock, was less than 4. And the Ford was 4 or more. And Ford's just had this really, really slow power steering ratio in all of their vehicles. But Cadillac's variable ratio power steering that it introduced in 1966 was just absolutely fantastic. And like I said, if you're looking for great steering during the late 1960s, early 70s, GM was the place to look for it. They had the best steering gears and steering boxes of the big three, for sure. Of course, AMC sometimes used GM steering boxes, as did some of the others. So I suppose anybody who was using the Saginaw steering box really got a great steering system, but that was not typical on other vehicles from the other automakers. Now, in addition to all of these innovative features that were first introduced on Cadillacs in the 1960s, you also got beautiful cars by and large. 1965-66 Cadillacs are some of my all-time favorites, and who can also forget the 1960 Cadillac, which I think was an even better interpretation of the 1959. Unfortunately, by the late 1960s, the Cadillacs grew, let's say, larger and more garish and more harsh in appearance. I still think that the 69 and 70 are not bad-looking cars, but they don't have the finesse that the earlier Cadillacs, let's say the 65, 6, 7, 8 as an example, had. Those cars are extremely cleanly styled and just beautiful overall. But regardless, you got those innovative features in Cadillacs, and even under hood, you got some innovative features. In 1968, you got the industry's largest V8, the 472 cubic inch V8 that replaced the Cadillac 429 cubic inch engine from the prior model year. And I guess Cadillac wanted to make sure they had the largest V8 since Lincoln had introduced its 462 cubic inch V8 by this point, and Cadillac was not about to be outdone with an engine that was anything but the largest in the industry. Of course, that 472 cubic inch V8 would become the 500 cubic inch V8 in 1970 in the Eldorado only, and it would be 400 gross horsepower. So a very powerful engine, under hood only in 1970 Eldorados, extremely smooth as well as powerful. So between the industry's largest V8 engine, as well as the other innovative features I mentioned, Cadillac was really the car to buy in the 1960s, and it was also beautiful. So what do you think? Did you know that Cadillac invented all of these items in the 1960s? Put a comment in the comment section and let me know. Thanks again for watching.